Welcome to the Psychology of Parental Alienation with me, Charlie McCready, a parental alienation coach, and my esteemed guest, Melanie Gill. We're going to be covering a range of topics today, including attachment theory, misdiagnosis of children, how the current system fails children, and suggestions on how to correct this. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce my guest, Melanie Gill. Melanie is an attachment expert, a specialist psychologist, and forensic consultant. She has over 16 years' experience working as an expert witness, assessing very complicated cases in care proceedings, and those involving parental alienation. She has a broad range of training, taking in attachment and forensic assessment, which yields very detailed and nuanced analysis of all family members. She has been a very vocal campaigner on children and family issues, including PA, for many years. Over the last 3 years, she's been targeted by women's groups, radical feminists, and a group of psychologists who have aligned with PA deniers. She's been accused of being a charlatan, a fraud, and a danger to the public. So you must be doing something right, Melanie. The accusations came to a head in the High Court of England in a landmark case in which PA was finally validated, but not in the eyes of the media. So misinformation still abounds. So thank you for joining us today, Melody.
Thank you for having me, and especially on a Saturday.
Well, thank you for joining us on a Saturday. So let's start by asking why you and other specialist professionals who work on these sorts of cases are portrayed so negatively in the media, and why parental alienation is being described as a pseudoscience.
It didn't used to be, but sort of, I think it was probably around about 5 years ago, there came this sort of direct switch. When I was actually campaigning to bring awareness of parental alienation around about 2014, 15, 16, it was actually fathers' organisations that were causing all the problems, and that switched. And what's happened is it's become this sort of fight between, about fathers' rights and mothers' rights, about male rights and female rights. And parental alienation is sitting there and is being used what they're basically saying is that women are victims, men are violent, and that these cases are being used to cover up the abuse of children and give children, to abusive fathers and take them away from victim mothers. And there's the mantra is that this is what's happening. Yeah. And so there was a sort of a rush to target professionals who've worked on these cases for years, who specialize in these cases and who are actually getting it right in these cases, finding out what's actually going on, because that's what you need to find out. Every single family is completely unique, and that's how you have to treat them. And at the end of the day, what's important to me is to find out why this is happening. What on earth is the backstory? But that's not what's generally happening. And so the people who were going in and finding the backstory were targeted. And I was targeted big style because I'm trained in peculiar ways.
Well, very professional ways rather than peculiar ways. But I totally agree with you. I think that everybody does have this unique situation. I think quite often it's like everybody's on a different spectrum, and there are different spectrums that kind of layer in together to create parental alienation. But it doesn't seem to be something that most psychologists understand. So I guess, can you tell us a little bit more about why the mental health professionals have still not recognized parental alienation as a pathology in its own right?
I mean, one thing to say also is that it completely exists on a scale, and you can have even, the worst alienating behaviors, and it can be completely unconscious by the alienator. And that's really important to know. You need to know, where is this behavior coming from? What on earth has made it happen in the first place?
And I just pause you there for 1 second. Sorry to interrupt, and I'll come back to the question in a second. But I think that is one question that constantly comes up when I'm speaking with parents about, does the alienator actually recognize what they're doing?
No, not, not always. And at other times, they know exactly what they're doing. But the thing is, I trained extensively in attachment science. And there really is nothing else that you can use to understand a family. I mean, what else is there, really? What you're looking at is an entire family. You're not looking at individuals. You're looking at individuals, but you're looking at how those individuals play out within their relationships with each other. And an attachment is the basic organizing mechanism for your brain. How your attachment relationships with your children play out, that's what builds their brain. There's nothing else. So, not understanding about attachment means that you're not going to actually understand about the relationships that are going on, and the developmental pathway that has got parents and children to where they are when you go and get involved in a case. And unfortunately, attachment is not taught in standard psychology training. The theory is gone over, but there were two theories. One of those theories has been invalidated. The clinical pattern has been invalidated, and so it should have been. And that's the theory that was being taught.
And is that still being taught?
I don't know, actually. I hope not.
I hope
The
not.
only validated theory now for use with children and families in cases is Patricia Crittenden's model. It's massively complicated. Well, of course it is, because people are complicated. It takes years to learn, but the assessments that flow from it are just amazing, because you can't get round them. And what they give you is, as I said, they give you this entire developmental picture of what has actually happened to someone. They show all the trauma that you have gone through, and if it is still remains unresolved, if it's in the process of being resolved, or it's actually been resolved, or if there are new traumas coming in. And it's done through an extensive narrative interview, and then you use discourse analysis on it, and you can't get around it. Believe you me, people have tried.
Yeah. As in the alienators can't get around it to disguise themselves.
You can't disguise it, because basically your brain's in charge of you. You can control a little bit of what's coming out of your mouth, but you can't control everything at all. And so, when you're explaining your childhood, then it flows, or it doesn't, or you leave things out. And all that you can see in these interviews. And they're also, they're reviewed by another expert. So everything, is it's really hardcore evidence-based. It's not guesswork or anything like that. And you really get to what on earth is going on with this parent. But I also use, a number of other ways of assessing as well. And it all fits together like a jigsaw. And when it doesn't fit like a jigsaw, then again, it's all really good information. But that's not what's going on in standard psychological training, which has moved more towards looking at the behavior that is going on right in front of you, like a psychiatrist. And there is a move, I think, to, they want to be able to diagnose. But again, diagnosis isn't scientific. Diagnosis, I actually attended a lecture given by the Royal Society of Medicine recently, and a psychiatrist said, a diagnosis is a hypothesis. It's a working hypothesis. A person can be given 5 different diagnoses by 5 different, clinicians. So again, and they don't then explain why this person has got this diagnosis. That's not part of it. And I think, the way psychologists are being trained is to try and cope with the huge level of mental distress that there is. But actually, if you look, say, at clinical psychology, it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked. Look at how our children are these days.
I think that's a big, just very quickly, somebody's just asked, What was the name of the person who developed this? Patricia something. And what was
Crittenden.
Crittenden. And what was the name of the
Crittenden.
model?
And the model is called the dynamic maturational model of attachment, the DMM.
The
And I
DMM.
can direct, I think Charlie can provide you with a lot of my webinars I've done for a parental alienation campaigning group called Families Divided TV. And I can give you the links to, I think I've done about 5 and I'm doing more. And in every single one, I discuss attachment.
Excellent. So I'll make that available to everybody through an email, and for anybody who's watching the recordings, this will go onto YouTube as well. I'll put up a template at the end with all those links. But just what you were saying there, Melanie, about I think that the way that psychologists currently look at or do their assessment is based on what is presented to them. And I think that's the big problem, because all the alienated parents who are watching here today will know that what is being presented is not what's going on. And this is the bear trap that, you know, all the therapists, the counselors, the psychologists who are dealing with these cases, typically, not all of them, but so many of them, just take what they see at face value, and it just plays into the alienator's hands.
Well, I mean, it's on a worldwide scale. How many people go to court and are in court for years and years and years and get nothing? How many of them have had reports in which have come out where it's clear that the professional doing the assessment has been pulled in and is completely biased? You know, these cases need to have a forensic head on them. You need to look at all the information you're getting as data. You know, that's what it is. It's data. You pull it in, it's data. You cannot, which is something standard psychologists do, is they give you an interview, a clinical interview, and then they form a hypothesis, and then they follow that hypothesis. Well, that's a recipe for disaster in these cases. You know, you can't. You've got to get to the truth underneath what's going on. You've got to have tools that actually are going to go in and, you know, look very, very carefully. And what the narrative interviews used in the DMM, they look at how people actually process thinking. They look at memory systems. They look at how you have stored all your childhood and everything else in your memories, because that tells you exactly what's gone on. It's pretty amazing, I have to say.
Yeah, that is. I mean, because those sorts of treatments, would that be helpful for people who are the alienators, almost have mandatory attachment theory psychological treatment in order to help them to understand and address why they are alienating their children? Do you think that might be effective?
Yes, it is, because you, as I said, you get to the bottom of what's going on. So with alienators, you will often find that they have been traumatized by their own parents' separation at whatever age. And they use something, you know, called projection. So all the trauma from then, the lack of explanation, the sadness, etc., which may have been ignored, or they may have been alienated or whatever. What you get is that is projected, onto their current partner. So projection, you know, as a mechanism has been known for, you know, decades. And basically it's, you have, you know, various memories, traumatic memories. And then when something chimes with that traumatic memory, then you try and offload it into somebody else. And at that point, you're acting on stuff that went beforehand, not stuff that's actually happening. And I see projection in a lot of alienators, and you can do something about it. But when the alienation is very bad,
can
they
do
won't.
something about it? Because what you're describing is something that everybody who is watching right now will be very familiar with, having experienced it firsthand. So is that something that trained psychologists and practitioners can do something about, or is that something that an alienated parent can do something about?
no, you need to go and do something about it. But again, the problem is that if you're a therapist and you don't have any experience of these cases, you know, and therapists are there to listen pretty much unconditionally, unless you're someone like a schema therapist where you challenge, challenge, challenge.
Mhm.
But if you listen unconditionally, you're going to validate the distorted thinking. And
Yeah.
that's what we see over and over again. So I would have put in proposals for therapy for all the family
Mhm.
to try and solve something. And the alienator will say, I'll go and find my own therapist. Now,
Mhm.
the problem is we just don't have enough therapists who know about these cases. And it's all has to be specialist. You can't just say, oh, well, they have family therapy. That doesn't work. You've
Yeah.
got to know about these cases, because one of the worst things that happens is you're pulled in to this distorted world. And that harms the parent who's sitting there telling you, you know, these fantasies or these delusions or what have you, because they're just validated. So it just makes the
Mm.
situation worse. You have to be
Absolutely.
so careful. And there are, you know, there's so many amazing therapies out there, but of course you have to pay for them. And you know, therapy through the NHS is pretty standard.
Mhm.
Everybody is exceptionally busy,
Yeah.
and nobody is being trained in these cases. And yet,
I
I
think
just
that's the
saw a
same in the
recent,
US as well. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, a recent statistic is that at any one time in the UK, there are 102,000 of these cases, and you know, ongoing.
Wow.
In
Yeah. Yeah.
America, there's over 4 million children that are being affected. Think
Mm.
of that across the world. I mean, this is a pandemic. If it
It
was,
is.
you know, a physical illness, we'd be doing something about it. But you know, the fight to keep it out, call it a pseudoscience,
Yeah.
is extremely,
So,
it's working.
but
It's working.
why are, I mean, there are professional bodies whose task it is to kind of recognize these pathologies. Do you know why they are not recognizing parental alienation?
Because they're scared of the rhetoric
Hmm.
that's going on. You know, because what's happened is it's now so tied in with the, you know, the domestic abuse agenda,
Yeah.
that what happens is people are scared. People are scared to go near it. You know, there's
Hmm.
quite a number of issues these days where people won't go. They won't go near it because it's, you know, more than a hot potato. We
Yeah.
can't get we can't get journalists to come and look at this. You know, and
Yes.
if you think, you know, here we've got, say, I think 24 people. I bet people here have got film and recordings of the horror that they went through.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of people here today who have that. Yeah.
You know, they will have the most horrendous record of what has actually happened to them and their family.
Mm.
And I'm beginning to think that that is going to be the only way. You know, like it's a bit like the post office scandal. You know, how many
Mm.
years did that take? And
Yeah.
also, you know, we had in the UK, we had recently a program showing a man who was severely physically abused by his partner, and the baby cam recordings were shown on TV, and
Mhm.
that absolutely grabs everybody's attention. But the problem is that the knowledge of human development is completely and utterly missing at the moment from government and
Yeah.
missing from the general population.
Yeah.
And that's what's shocking. Back in 2000, well, yeah, 2000, I started an organization trying to bring world experts to Parliament to give the knowledge to politicians. And we
Hmm.
did pretty well.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
know, we got the knowledge in, we got things changed, we got policy that was following what actually happens to a baby when they're born.
Yeah.
And we got it.
Yeah.
But then we got shut down by other politicians because their focus just wasn't on children.
Yeah, I've had my fair share of dealing with politicians, and it's a very difficult thing to do in all countries to bring around that kind of regulatory and legislative change.
I
Um,
mean, the narrative around children these days is just quite frankly ridiculous. And at the end of the day, if you think about it, when you're in court, children are nowhere.
So
They can
just
concentrate on the fight between the parents.
yeah, I would agree with that, and money.
Yeah.
One of the questions that's come in was, um, they're just saying, I understand the family courts are again looking more skeptically at the case or the use of unregulated experts, and this is in the UK.
Mm.
Have you had any recent issues with not being allowed to work with families in the court system, or have you found hostility, and how have you dealt with this?
Now, this unregulated thing is obviously the thing that's been fired at me the whole time, and the problem
Yeah.
is it's misinformation. They're
Hmm.
talking about a lack of regulation by the Healthcare Professions Council.
Yep.
And no, I'm not regulated by the Healthcare Professions Council. It only regulates half the psychologists in this country, because it
Hmm.
only regulates psychologists with very specific training and titles. So there's 7 sorts of psychologists it regulates,
Hmm.
and there's about 35 different psychologists out there doing very different things. I happen to be one of them.
Yep.
Um,
And you're
so,
clearly highly trained,
well, I've done
but
weird
but
training.
just not regulated by that body. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not regulated by that body. And as I said, over half the psychologists in the country aren't. The other thing about the HCPC is it regulates those psychologists in their contact with the public. Now, I
Hmm.
don't work with the public. I don't have one of the protected titles. And the other thing is it's not run by psychologists. It's run by pen pushers.
Hmm. Hmm.
And they don't regulate the very thing that everybody was trying to get me on. So they don't regulate the function of a psychologist. So
Yeah.
there are no psychologists in this country whose methodology is regulated. So, which is
Gosh,
really quite bad, because
that's a pretty big statement.
but that's what the
Yeah.
HCPC wrote to the president in the High Court. They said, you must realise that we don't regulate the function of any of our psychologists. That's
Mm.
the thing that they were going after me on. Um, so, no psychologist is regulated. And the point is, in these cases, standard psychology uses psychometric instruments,
Hmm.
which are validated on groups. And the
Yep.
point is that there are no psychometric tests that are validated on these cases. And that's because,
Or parental alienation.
yeah,
Yeah.
because everybody lies. They're
Yeah.
self-report tools. Everybody lies,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is why you have to use very different methodology in order to, get underneath what's going on and
Which is
find
the
out the
attachment
story.
theory. Bingo. Yeah. Yeah.
But you
I mean,
can't complain about that because that's not regulated.
no, no. But also it's not in widespread use from what you're saying.
No, it isn't. No, and
Yeah.
when I was campaigning and advising policymakers, the children's commissioner at the time, the deputy children's commissioner, I remember
Hmm.
being in a meeting, and she said the shocking thing is, she said, clinical psychologists are not being trained in attachment science. She
Yeah.
said, we're trying to do something about it. That was in 2014.
But basically what you're also saying is that this is going to continue to be a problem because attachment theory does, it's a tool that will help people to understand what's really going on, as
Yeah, in
opposed to classical
themselves. Yeah,
psychology, yeah, which only just looks at almost the symptoms of what's being presented to them. And again,
yeah.
this will resonate with so many parents, especially the parents that I've worked with as well, where we've had exactly that conversation about that the psychologists only, and CAFCAS and the social workers and the CFP and everybody else, or CPS, DCF, these are not people who are trained to actually be able to see what's going on with the alienators. But I guess also the same thing applies to the children.
Well, absolutely. And most psychologists, standard psychologists, are trained to assess adults,
Hmm.
children, not both. I mean,
Yeah.
there are some who do, but not both. And, psychometric tests can't assess parenting. They
Mm.
can't address the serious psycho-legal issues of these cases, because that's what's going on here. There
Yeah.
is this, and a forensic crossover. Um, And we can't get forensic psychologists to come and work on these cases because they're trained in a very particular way, you know, to go and work in prisons. You know,
Yeah.
the way psychologists are trained is to do with what is considered to be needed in the public, basically. So you have a sports psychologist, educational psychologists,
But not a parental alienation
but
psychologist.
no. So the point is that what happened to me absolutely scared everybody, and they ran for the hills. So people will not, you know, the specialists who are out there who have trained in weird and wonderful ways, because as you work on these cases, you think, I need to find out about that. I need to go and train in that. I need to go and do something about that. And so they go off and they, you know, support what they're seeing. And so, you know, there was absolutely, everybody was so scared. I mean, you know, and I got up to the High Court and, you know, I was exonerated. And, you know, and it was
rightly
said,
so.
my qualifications should never have been questioned. And there were, you know, there were basically lies told me about me in court. And again, they carry on.
And these were by people who didn't even understand parental alienation.
Yeah, that was the worry. And also don't understand attachment either. That's the big worry.
Yeah.
And the guidelines that have been proposed by the Family Justice Council were actually directed by the organisation that I won costs against. So there's been actually a lot of challenge to that. And I'm part of an organisation now that is trying to bring about change and do good things for children, called the God, you know what, Charlie? I've forgotten the name of it.
The Change for Children International.
That's it. Now, if you go onto that website, you'll see our challenge to the Family Justice Council recommendations. And I think they had something like 49 organizations write in, say, you need to adjust this. And one of the things that they said was that the behavior of the child has got nothing to do with the parent.
What?
Which is just jaw-droppingly ignorant.
I mean, you don't need to be a psychologist, just an alienated parent to realize that that is the furthest possible thing from the truth.
Yeah, I mean, it was just such a basic thing, and there it was in this document, which is going to go out to courts and everybody, and you know, and influence how cases are held. So, I mean, the other problem that
this was a consultation, wasn't it?
Yes. But what they did is they published it, and people and lawyers are already saying, well, the FJC says.
Yeah.
Which is like, well, no, it's not been ratified.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and the FJC is the Family Justice
Council.
Yeah. And when has that consultation process now finished?
Yes, yes, it has. It finished months ago, and we're still pressing. You know, sorry, I've just realising I'm very red. It's very hot in my little office. Sorry about that.
Don't worry.
One big block of pink.
You look wonderful, and you are wonderful. Just with so they're now deliberating on all the submissions that have been received, I guess, from various parties. When might we hear some kind of initial consultation responses?
I've got absolutely no idea. I've got no idea. I mean, what we've pointed out is just all the problems with the current system is that at the end of the day, you need to know why. You know, if you don't know why, you're going to go and choose recommendations that don't fit. You're going to not have an understanding of the very deep harm that is being caused to children. Because, you know, over 16 years, I've picked out all these very specific areas of harm. And now, I mean, I'm doing a master's in behavioral science, which looks at deception and credibility. And one of the things that we look at is psychophysiology, the psychophysiology of deception. And I looked at the brain, and I went and looked at the damage caused to brains through deception and through the specific deception that's used in these cases. And I've done a webinar on the damage caused to children's brains, which is on the Families Divided website, and I
And
can.
this is something that is really shocking for a parent with an alienated child to hear. So I would encourage everybody, prick your ears up. What Melanie is about to tell you is deeply disturbing.
So basically parental alienation cases involve very complex deception, because basically one parent involves a child in lies and deception, and that child then takes part in the deception.
Mm.
And that is monstrously harmful, but it's harmful to brain tissue. And what I found is that children in these situations, you'll all know what I'm talking about, start to have this very black and white thinking. They go, one parent's bad, one parent's good. And they achieve that by something called cognitive dissonance. And that's the brain protecting itself by looking at two things which don't make any sense.
Absolutely.
You know, mummy says daddy doesn't love me. Daddy says mummy doesn't love me. How is a child supposed to cope with that? So what the brain does is makes a decision and it goes, do that, get rid of that one, believe that one. Now, you're only supposed to use this in an emergency, really, when you have to make a quick decision. Children in these situations are using it daily and all the time as they try and cope. It damages the brain. It damages very particular parts of the brain. And there's the deception, as children start to be alienated, they will momentarily recognize that something isn't right. They'll recognize that they're being lied to. Now, they won't maybe be able to make that conscious, but that damages the brain. It's all explained in my webinar. It goes into great detail, but the important thing is that damage is permanent.
So how is this? Because I think this is another big question that parents have, and certainly I've personally seen long-term impacts on my children, who are now in their 30s, and it's very clear the impact it's had. But what sort of long-term impacts does your research kind of point towards?
Well, it shows, it explains why so many cases, you just find that, at the age of 30, that your child is still saying, I hate you. You did this to me, because the brain change has been permanent. If you're going to fix this, what you have to do is the therapy will, the brain has enormous plasticity. So you have to get other areas to start working, because these areas have been damaged, and the more lies that you're involved in and the more lies that you then have to tell means you become more and more of a liar. And all of it is actually also, they found, in the brains of people with narcissistic thought processing. So what these cases are doing and what these families are doing, it's a crucible for creating narcissistic children. And I've found that over and over and over again.
Bingo, because I think that there are a number of us who've had that experience of seeing the children become narcissistic themselves, and it seems to follow some of the, it's a very loosely used word, which I'm overused, I would almost have said, but so many of the alienating parents seem to have some sort of cluster B or some narcissistic type behaviors or personality disorders. And I think you were saying before that this actually links, you can detect this through attachment theory.
Well, yes, you can, because what I've found, and again, guess what? I did a webinar on narcissism and the patterns of attachment that I've found over 16 years in case after case after case. What has gone on in the background, and it's really quite horrifying. Now, the actual personality disorder is not helpful. It's just a label. But what you have to understand about narcissism is it exists on a scale, and it's actually the brain protecting itself. So it's an adaptation. And what happens is that in extremis, the brain will bring a focus down to just the self Nobody else is to be believed. Everything is just about me.
Yeah.
And it can exist in a whole range of different forms. So there's like vulnerable, soft, hard, pathological, you know, all these things.
Mm-hmm.
And the patterns, what I found is the patterns in mothers and fathers were very, very different. But
Very
what it
interesting.
means also is the children and anybody else are just not there. And the other interesting thing is
Sorry,
it can
when you
develop.
say not there, what do you mean?
They're not in their, they're not in, you know, in their mind. They're not in their mind, because all that's going on is the brain is trying to protect, protect, protect.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
only get to be narcissistic when your attachment relationships are dangerous.
Okay.
So, and that danger that I've found in the, you know, in these interviews is basically a lack of intimacy in the attachment relationship, a focus on how the child is sort of performing at school.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, it's not massive trauma we're talking about. And you see it time and time and again. You know, you'll have a parent who basically was, you know, they didn't sit down to dinner. They weren't sort of comforted when they were distressed. There was a push for them to perform, you know, be the best at school and what have you.
Yeah.
That's just one route to it. And it's really concerning, but you can develop it at any age. And what you find when there's an extreme stress upon you,
Yeah.
so you actually find in some of these cases that the most normal person will suddenly become more narcissistic because their brain just kicks into gear and goes, right, I'll take over, don't you worry.
Mm,
I'm just going to concentrate on you.
mm, mm.
And we are creating children who the trauma of parental alienation is so great, their brain's
Absolutely.
saying, whoa, I don't want any part of this toxic relationship, even if I can't consciously understand that. So I'm just going to make it all about you.
Mm.
And the problem is that what we're finding now is that narcissistic people band together in a
Yeah.
sort of group think way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we're seeing that. And you know, the precursor to it is this black and white thinking, where you have a very strong opinion about one thing and everything else is discarded.
Is
If you
this
think
where the
about the,
uncompromising behavior comes from as well? There's
yes,
almost like
absolutely.
there's almost like an infantile quality to the narcissist, not to the narcissist, but to the alienating parents. It's a very consistent theme that they have. That they're very childlike. But is that black and white quality you're talking
Yeah,
about?
and it's also, I mean, narcissism is an extremely primitive way of defending yourself. I mean, the other
Mm.
primitive way is psychopathy, and I'm hoping to do a webinar on that at some point.
Yeah.
Um, but you know, in terms of attachment, it's meant that, you know, things have got very dangerous within relationships. You know, there's no
Mm.
reciprocity going on,
No.
and that can happen, you know, from birth, but can also happen, you know, in adulthood, when your relationship that you thought, you know, I've loved this person, you know, your romantic partner is an attachment figure, and
Yeah.
suddenly they go bugger off. And by the way, you know, you're a psychopath or whatever.
And
And they just bring it down. They
I think
absolutely
we've all
cut.
we've all seen that. It's
Yeah,
like there's all and almost for put from the experience of many parents, you start a relationship with one of these people who've got all these issues, and they kind of decide a lot of the time, even before we do, the relationship is over, and they bring it down at that point in time. They kind of cut us off, and the barriers go up, and then it might be a while before the relationship finally ends. But it's a shock for us
it's a
as
huge
being
shock.
more normal people, whatever normal is. But the more normal people or empathetic people, it's just like, what? How did this happen? And then suddenly our children are being turned against us as well.
And it's incomprehensible. I mean, the
Yeah.
point is that what I've found is that the patterns of relationships are, say, a mother who is narcissistic or a father who is narcissistic, and the other parent is far more stable.
Mm.
Now, the development pathway of the stable parent is such that they have never experienced severe trauma. They've never had to have the sorts of daily attachment problems or challenges that the narcissistic parent has. So when they get this shock, they absolutely don't know how to deal with it, and they cannot adapt in the moment to be able to cope with it, because that's what adaptation is. You know, you're presented with a danger, you adapt.
Yeah.
So they can't adapt, so they develop this very specific form of post-traumatic stress.
So you're basically talking about everybody who's listening now
Yeah.
will have been in that position. So yeah, so how does that affect them then, this post-traumatic stress?
Well, it can absolutely, you know, mean they just can't do anything. They're going to be triggered. They're going to be distressed. But sometimes what they also do is they get pulled in to the, you know, completely distorted worldview of what's going on, and they try desperately to defend themselves, and they become embroiled in deception as well.
In
And
what
it's
way?
very naive deception.
So
It's,
they,
you
they,
know,
they
well, I
become
remember when
embroiled.
they did that.
Yeah, so how do they become embroiled? As in
Well,
they're lying themselves, or
they
they just
then try and triangulate their children into their view, and
yeah,
it's from sheer panic.
yeah, yeah.
But and they get triggered very easily. They get, you know, triggered. They, you know, they get memory loss. They get a lot of things you see
And
in
everybody will be nodding their
post-traumatic
heads, going,
stress.
yeah, yeah, this
But
is all
there is
very
a
familiar.
solution. There is a solution. What I always recommend is that these parents go and have EMDR, which is
Yeah,
eye movement
for trauma.
desensitization.
Yeah.
And but they have to make sure that they explain very carefully to the therapist exactly the context of what is going on. And EMDR helps them with the triggering. You know, the minute there's a letter from court, the minute there's a lawyer's letter, the minute there's any contact,
Absolutely.
you know, with the ex, it helps them handle, you know, the immense distress and the heart rate going up. You know, I had EMDR to cope with what was happening to me.
So is it correct to say that EMDR is tapping back into their earlier past experiences?
Yes, it is. Do you know what they don't know why it works, but it works. I mean, it's
Yeah,
brilliant.
as long as
And
it works, that's the
you
most
sit and
important
you
thing.
watch somebody's finger, and your brain sort of reprocesses things, and it works quickly. It works
Yeah,
quickly.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
you know, if
That's
you
good.
are, this is how you are, I would recommend, you know, some EMDR.
Because I think any parent who's been through this experience will have been to some degree traumatized by this.
Well,
That's
they've also had brain damage.
yeah.
You know, I want to get to a place where people can walk into court and say, this damages the brain, because how can you argue with that? How can you argue? You know, at the moment, nobody is paying attention to actually what is going on, because they're getting too much information on the presenting behavior.
Yeah.
And they need to know actually what's going on in these families. And of course, that's why they're trying to keep people like me out.
Yeah. I mean, I have conversations all the time about looking beyond what is being presented to you by your child and understanding the experience they're actually going through, but also detaching yourself from that, because otherwise your experience starts getting kind of muddled up with their experience, which is you can't sort of unpick it so easily. I've just had a question through though, which I think is really, really good, which was, is EMDR something that would work for children as well?
Yes, yes, there are child practitioners as well. Not small
Okay.
children, probably, but there are child practitioners. There's a lot of specialist help out there. You know, schema therapy. I use schema assessments, and schema therapy is very simply is a mix of sort of psychotherapy and CBT techniques. But it's again it challenges, and it's just one of the most amazingly effective therapies that there is. And it's been validated for use with narcissistic people. It works very well because you're being challenged, but you're being challenged in this very safe space.
So does it help people with narcissism to recover from narcissism?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
So I've seen it work, Charlie. I mean, basically, not always, because unfortunately what you find with parents who have got really significant psychopathology is they want to fight. They want the vengeance. They want to fight. They're not interested.
We
They
see
don't
that all the
believe it.
time. Yeah.
You know, that's, you know, it's not going to happen. But every now and again, I've had a parent who has gone, oh my God, when you've explained exactly what is going on with the children and the harm and the risk trajectory that's going on, then they have gone and done it. And the first thing you see is that they lose a particular type of attachment functioning, which is coercive and deceptive, and is the one that triangulates the children into their worldview.
Yeah.
So it has worked. I've worked with not in parental alienation proceedings, with 2 psychopathic individuals as well, who I've sent for sensory motor therapy, and it's worked.
Good. I mean, I think one of the things that we as alienated parents would all recognize is just how difficult it is to get somebody with these disorders into therapy or into treatment, because as soon as you start touching any of their sensitivities, they're out of there as quickly as, you know, they're quite happy to talk about our issues and our sense and our vulnerabilities, but they won't go near their own.
No, and that's why, you know, in courts should say, you have to do this. And I've been involved in a number of courts, who have said, this is what you've got to do in order, you know, to see your children.
I think that would work brilliantly. So I've got another couple of questions here, which would be good to get through as well. So I've been asked, is it better to not introduce individual therapy if the therapist or the psychologist isn't familiar with narcissistic abuse and reaction abuse and parental alienation?
Yeah, no, I've seen, I mean, it can be disastrous. If you've got a therapist, if you've got a therapist who goes, oh, right, I'm going to go and find out about that, and then I'm going to go and be supervised by somebody who knows all about it, because that's what I've done in the past. We haven't been able to find somebody who knew about it in one area. So we got someone who knew a bit about it, and then we had them supervised by a very, very experienced therapist. But again, they're running for the hills because they were frightened about what happened to me. But no, I mean, you know, therapists are so vulnerable because the whole point is you're supposed to listen to your client, but it validates it, it cements it. And with children, it's so fast. They just cement, you know, these distorted thoughts. And before you know it, you have false memories.
And I mean, it is shocking. So another question for you, Melanie. We might as well get great value for the parents here. So somebody's asking, should the children continue to be exposed to the alienating parents? In her case, the so-called supervised contact ordered still allows the alienating father to continue the manipulative narratives. And she just goes on to ask, why is the system not containing those abusers?
Because they're getting assessments which don't actually show what's going on. And then because the system is so adversarial, a lot of the time there's compromise. I mean, one thing that I've done in cases previously is that when there's no way around it and supervised contact is on, you get 2 people in the room, and you get people who have had a bit of training and they know exactly what's going on. I've done a number of cases where there's very, very canny social workers who have worked together in teams in order to make sure that the the behaviors, the alienating behaviors aren't going on. But the problem is that this isn't about behavior. This is about what is going on in the alienator's brain, because children are connected to their parents' brain through right brain to right brain connections, and children pick up the micro expressions, these tiny little movements, tone of voice. They are absolutely clued in to the
Yeah.
way their parent thinks, which is why they can be brainwashed so easily.
Yeah.
So the number of times, I film absolutely everything,
Mhm.
and I then go and show what's going on. One of the most common things that everybody gets wrong about children is that smiling means they're happy.
Mm.
And so you'll see a contact where it all looks absolutely lovely. I did a case where what was happening with one parent was the children were just absolutely perfect and gorgeous and lovely. And then in the other, with the other parent, they were horrendous and awful. Their behavior was awful. And guess what? Everybody said, well, clearly the
It's the
lovely
parent.
one is the truth.
Yeah.
And what I showed by using frame by frame analysis is
Mhm.
absolutely what was going on with the falsification
Mhm.
of pleasure,
Yeah.
which I've learned over the years. And now I'm learning it even more with facial action coding system, and things like that. So you can see a false smile. If you think about the worst case ever, which
Yeah.
was Victoria Climbié, in the UK. And for people who don't know that case, it's a little girl who was tortured for months and was taken to hospital on multiple occasions, and all the time smiling and dancing.
And that was her coping mechanism to
Yeah,
deal with the
and
reality.
it's unconscious.
Yeah,
Children,
because
children adapt, because what it does when you're smiling at an abusive parent,
mm.
the abuse is lessened.
But does that apply? I assume that applies in the opposite direction, because as you're saying, with the alienating parent, which is all about appeasing them and having to do whatever they need to keep that person happy, the alienator, then they're with us as the alienated parent. We get the opposite, because the kid's having to appear to us as being unhappy and discontent and not loving us, because if they don't, they're then going to get into trouble with the alienating parent.
Yeah, so everything is governed by fear.
Yeah. Yeah, I say that all the time.
Yeah, everything is governed by fear, but a lot of it is unconscious as well. The point is that also when they get to the alienated parent, the atmosphere is more relaxed.
Yeah.
And so all the inhibited, negative emotion that's been in them tends to come out. And that, of course, is then translated as the fault of the alienated parent, when of course it's not. It's because of the massive toxic anxiety that is taking place in the child because of the resident parent. And
Yes.
all this is not understood in standard assessments. You've got to get down to these absolutely nuanced ways of thinking, especially. You've got to look at the way parents think.
I think this is the really big message for all the parents today. It is the understanding that traditional psychology is not able, because as you say, it's all based on diagnosis. The diagnosis is typically wrong, and it's based on what is presented to the practitioner, rather than getting into what we all know as alienated parents. You need to get into what sits underneath, and all the science and all the stuff, the great stuff you're doing is kind of reinforcing that 110%. You need to get into what's really going on, not what's just being presented to you.
You need to know why.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you don't, what does the diagnosis tell you? You've got a label. Thank you.
Yeah.
It doesn't tell you what
Like,
does, one of
narcissism.
the problems with things like the letter of instruction in the UK is it says, give the parents an intelligence test. But why would you do that? It's really quite simple that, the majority of parents undergoing this have had, usually they've been educated.
Hmm.
What is having an intelligence test going to show you?
No,
One thing I was
nothing.
going to say, because I know there was a question about diagnosis, is the level of misdiagnosis that goes on in these cases.
Yes. Please talk about that, because this is another eye-opener for parents.
Well, again, there's a webinar I've just done on the high levels of misdiagnosis of ADHD and ASD in these cases. And it's basically because trauma is mistaken
So sorry,
for symptoms.
ASD being autism.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then ADHD. And it's basically because trauma is that these traumatized children They're symptoms of trauma. If you're the alienator who's causing the trauma, there's absolutely no way you could possibly think that this is to do with you. It's not even going to occur. So
Yeah.
you will go and medicalize anything and everything. So you will see allergies, you will see transgender now. I've been seeing that over the
Do you know,
last
I see
years.
transgender more and more, and I see autism a lot. And so it's really helpful to understand that this is, again, I guess it's like a reaction or coping mechanisms on the part of the child.
Well, it can be, and also it can be a vengeful thing. It can be a case of, well, if I get a diagnosis, then, I can say the other parent there's no way they're going to understand. There's no way. And especially say with transgender, when you will
Yeah.
get one parent going, what? Don't be ridiculous. At that point, it's very easy to say, well, you simply don't understand, so you can't see the child. But you see, there's allergies, there's all sorts of things. I mean, in one of the worst cases I did, it was serious mental illness and suicidality. And I just thought this child is actually going to be killed. And there was this long, medical record of incidents that had happened. And the problem is also that GP surgeries, doctors' surgeries, they aren't trained in this either. So they will be pulled in to the world of the alienator. They will make the referrals sometimes to validate these incorrect diagnoses. With ADHD and ASD, if it wasn't there in the first year, it's not there.
As in the first year since the child was born?
Yeah.
That's fascinating, because in so many instances, it seems to manifest itself so much later on in their lives.
No.
Which is then linked to the parental alienation.
Yeah, it's just rubbish. It's just absolutely rubbish. And there are ways of doing it. You can see it. I mean, there's specific attachment patterns associated with ASD, and you'll find that these children, they just don't. It's ridiculous. And yet they'll have this label. They'll have this lack of explanation of what has actually gone on in their lives.
Yeah.
No access to that knowledge at all.
So, in addition to EMDR, is there anything else that you would suggest parents can do that will help their children with, different psychological treatments, and also kind of across different age groups?
It's get a proper assessment. Get a proper,
as in the
attachment
theory
assessment. Yeah, I mean, such is the chaos in the courts, and my judgment has been totally mistranslated by many lawyers, that people like me are now going to be advising only one side. So we're going to be giving, information and doing assessments for just one side that they can take into court and defend themselves with against poor assessments.
And how does the court view attachment theory?
Oh, the president actually a couple of years ago just explained how important it was, and I've got numerous judgments which haven't been published. Attachment has always been used and found useful to courts, because there is nothing else that explains human development and how a family functions. So there is a particular judgment in which President McFarlane refers to the neuroscience of attachment and uses it in a judgment in which he gave a child who was attached, who had a full attachment relationship with a foster parent rather than strangers who were part of their family, and he gave the child to the one who they were attached to, and it was in the judgment. I'm happy to share that judgment.
I think actually that would be really, really interesting. There's another there's another question that's very common. I hear this all the time, which is basically, I'll just read it out. When, if ever, or as a child gets older, is it a good idea to explain the truths of manipulation and alienating behaviors, basically pointing out the facts, the cause and reactions that are creating the chaos and division, to basically having the conversation about alienation?
I would do that with some help. I would do it with some help, because you know, the alienated children's brains have been damaged, as has, you know, alienated parents. And it's really easy to, you know, re-trigger things. You know, I've dealt with a case where one of the worst cases ever, where the therapy was, you know, it was working. I mean, it's going to take years, because at the end of the day, you've got to do something about the brain damage.
Yeah.
And it literally, it only takes 1 minute to go back to the original position, and that is because the brain is altered.
So ingrained. Yeah.
So I would suggest help with some sort of, you know, family therapist.
Because I mean, I constantly discourage parents from having any conversations about alienation, and without the science behind it that you've just explained, but just out of practical experience, children don't want to seem to have that conversation, because it makes them very insecure and very vulnerable.
Well, it agitates, you know, they, again, what they've got is the, you know, the two opposing things going on in their head, and your brain's going to go, right, don't worry, we'll use cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that there was an earlier question which was basically saying, at what point in time, or is there an age limit at which point you can't help them? But I guess what you're also saying is you can help them at any point in time, but with the right help, EMDR and other therapeutic assistance.
And the thing is to have it all assessed properly, so it's there.
Yeah.
You know, it's there in black and white, a proper assessment, not a, oh, look at that, that's there. That must mean that.
Because there are so many parents that are dealing with children who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, who you know, are still very enmeshed with the thinking of the alienating parent. But I think what you're saying is that that can still be corrected with the right sort of treatment.
And they need psychoeducation. You know, that's the other thing. They need education about this phenomena.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's, you know, there's a lot of stuff out there. There really is, but that's, you know, that's really big.
But not enough people like you to address the scale of the problem. I think that's probably the big, yeah.
People are too scared to put
issue.
their head above the parapet. But I've been cancelled. You know, I've been cancelled, so
Yeah,
stick my head above the parapet on a whole load of things soon.
Just quickly going back to the work that you're doing with the children's, the Change for Children International, would you and Martin be quite happy if we shared the submission document? Is it a public document?
Yeah, it's a public document. So you can go onto the website and have a look at it and see the battle that we're up against.
Yeah, because I've got the document, so I can actually make that available to everybody later, either in the recording or by an email to everybody at the end of this session.
And I'm happy to do another of these sessions.
I think that would be very helpful, because I'm just conscious of time and I don't want to take up your entire Saturday.
I've got to feed the dog.
Yeah, but life goes on. Life goes on. Can I ask you one final question, which is really, if you were to give parents sort of 1 or 2 nuggets of what should they be doing to deal with alienation, what would that be?
They need to be in a psychologically calm space, so that they're not, that they're not, you know, that because all of it is harmful, and the harm is just piling on and piling on, and they need to be able to do something about it. I mean, one of the interesting things about the masters that I'm doing, you know, is we did, you know, a whole thing on mindfulness, and I didn't realize about mindfulness. You know, they use it in the SAS, they use it in the army, they use it in across so many different professions now, and it helps you. I mean, you had to go and practice it for 3 months in order to do this particular assignment, which I did, and it is amazingly helpful. There are lots of apps out there. I went and did lunchtime meditation, which, you know, I would have scoffed at previously. That helped hugely in lowering my anxiety to do with, you know, the attacks which were coming day after day after day. And all of that helps. You know, mindfulness is the most easily accessible.
Yeah, yeah.
If you can't, you know, if you can't manage to find some sort of, you know, a therapist who is going to help you. But it's, you've got to keep yourself psychologically helpful because your brain is being affected.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that, Melanie, because that is one of the top things that I absolutely advocate to parents all of the time. It's you're best placed to help your child when you're in a good place yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the hardest things for parents to absorb and take on board because they're so focused on trying to help their kids.
And they're so in the moment of panic.
Yeah, yeah. And they kind of forget that they are the foundation stone for making all the rest of it work, helping their own family as well as helping the children, because their own families are going through all this distress as well. It's you know, everybody's impacted.
Yeah, no, it just spreads out.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
horrendous.
yeah. But Melanie, thank you so much for coming along and joining us today. I would love to do another session with you. And I'm sure that this has been tremendously helpful for everybody who's decided to join us today. Your insight is just phenomenal. And it's just been an absolute pleasure having you as, and you're a wonderful person as well, which is
Thank you. A very, very red person.
you're perfect as you are. You're perfect as you are.
Thank you.
But no, thank you so much for joining us. And we'd love to have you back again.
Thank you. And I'll send you all the links to all the various talks. And I'll be doing another one on lying as well soon.
I would love to hear that, and any further information that I can help share to the parents that are listening here and in other places, I'd love to do, because I think your insights are tremendously helpful. They're
And I
really,
just,
really
you know, I'd just like to say that, you know, we have the tools to get to the bottom of all of these, even, you know, the difficult cases with false allegations and all that sort of thing. And we've got the tools. We should be damn well using them.
I totally agree. And I would love to do more work with you on the Change for Children International, and just trying to help with some of this legislative change.
Yeah.
Bringing some of my past experience to that as well. But yeah, I'd love to help you guys more.
Okay.
But Melanie, thank you so much for joining us this Saturday, and thank everybody else who all the parents who kindly joined us as well. And we'll get something else in the diary, and we'll come back and we'll talk more about this.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody.
Great. Okay. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.